The Aztec Empire. In the heart of Lake Texcoco rose a city that seemed impossible, Tenochtitlan, a metropolis of 200,000 people built on water, connected by causeways, fed by floating gardens, and crowned by pyramids that scraped the sky. By the early 1500s, it was larger than London, Paris, or any city in Europe. The Aztecs ruled over 5 million people across 80,000 square miles. Their warriors had never been defeated. Their gods demanded blood, and they paid that debt with the beating hearts of their enemies, cut from their chests atop the Great Pyramid. But empires built on terror create enemies everywhere. The tribes they conquered never forgot. The Tlaxcalans, forced for a century to surrender their children for sacrifice, waited for a chance to strike back. That chance arrived in 1519, the year their calendar said the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl would return from the east. From the east came Hernán Cortés. Just 500 Spanish soldiers, a few horses, and a handful of cannons. Moctezuma, the Aztec emperor, sent gold and gifts, hoping to appease what might be a god. Instead, the gold only sharpened Spanish hunger. Cortés marched toward Tenochtitlan, and along the way, the conquered tribes joined him. By the time he reached the capital, tens of thousands of native warriors marched beside the Spanish, not as slaves but as allies eager for revenge. Moctezuma welcomed Cortés into the city, and within weeks he was a prisoner in his own palace. When the Aztecs finally rose against the invaders, they drove them out in a night of chaos and slaughter, La Noche Triste. But the Spanish had left something behind, the smallpox. The disease spread like fire through a population with no immunity. Within months, half of Tenochtitlan was dead. The Emperor Cuitlahuac died. Warriors who had never lost a battle couldn't fight what they couldn't see. Cortés returned 10 months later with a larger army and 13 warships built to control the lake. He cut the aqueducts. He blocked the causeways. For 80 days, Tenochtitlan starved. On August 13, 1521, the last Emperor Cuauhtémoc was captured fleeing by canoe. The city that had ruled an empire was reduced to rubble and corpses. The Aztecs had believed the gods demanded sacrifice to keep the world alive. In the end, the world they knew died anyway. Not because they failed their gods, but because a prophecy, a disease, and a century of enemies all arrived at once. The Persian Empire. In 550 BC, a prince named Cyrus led a rebellion against his own grandfather, the king of the Medes, and he won. Within 20 years, Cyrus had conquered Lydia and its legendary gold, swept through Babylon without a fight, and built the largest empire the world had ever seen. But Cyrus didn't rule through fear. He freed the Jews from Babylonian captivity. He let conquered peoples keep their gods, their laws, and their languages. The Persians called him father. History called him Cyrus the Great. His successors made the empire even greater. Darius I stretched Persian rule from Egypt to India, from the Balkans to the Arabian Sea, over 5 million square kilometers. He built the Royal Road, 2,500 kilometers connecting his capitals. He created a postal system so fast that messages crossed the empire in days. He raised Persepolis, a ceremonial city where representatives from 20 nations brought tribute to the King of Kings. But Darius made a mistake. He tried to conquer Greece and lost at Marathon. His son Xerxes swore revenge. He assembled the largest army the ancient world had ever seen and marched toward Europe. When a storm destroyed his bridge across the Hellespont, Xerxes ordered the sea whipped 300 times. He even threw chains into the water to punish it. Then he built a new bridge, 600 ships tied together, and his army crossed in 7 days. At Thermopylae, 300 Spartans and a few thousand Greeks blocked his path. Xerxes sent a messenger demanding they surrender their weapons, but King Leonidas sent back 2 words: "Come and take them." For 3 days the Greeks held. Then a traitor showed the Persians a mountain path. Surrounded, Leonidas sent his allies away. He and his Spartans stayed to die. Xerxes burned Athens. But at Salamis, the Greek fleet destroyed his navy. At Plataea, they crushed his army. The King of Kings fled home. The dream of conquering Greece died with him. But the empire limped on for another 150 years. Then came Alexander. The Macedonian king crossed into Asia in 334 BC with 40,000 men. At Granicus, at Issus, at Gaugamela, 3 battles, 3 disasters. Darius fled east, betrayed by his own general, stabbed and left dying on a roadside. Alexander found the body. He wrapped it in his own cloak and sent it to Persepolis for a royal burial. Then he burned the city to ashes. "Revenge," he said, "for Athens." The empire that taught the world how to rule had fallen to a student of its example. The Japanese Empire. In 1868, a teenage emperor named Meiji inherited a feudal nation of samurai and shoguns. Within 50 years, Japan had transformed into the first Asian power to defeat a European nation, crushing Russia's fleet at Tsushima in 1905. By 1942, the rising sun flag flew over Korea, Manchuria, Southeast Asia, and half the Pacific. An island smaller than California controlled an empire of over 100 million people. But Japan had made a fatal miscalculation. On December 7, 1941, its planes attacked Pearl Harbor, betting that America would accept a negotiated peace rather than fight a long war. Admiral Yamamoto, who planned the attack, had studied in America. He warned his superiors they had awakened a sleeping giant, but they ignored him. By 1945, the empire was strangling. American submarines had sunk Japan's merchant fleet, cutting off oil, rubber, and food. The navy that had terrorized the Pacific lay scattered across the ocean floor. B-29 bombers turned Tokyo into an inferno, 100,000 dead in a single night of firebombing. Yet Japan's generals demanded the nation fight to extinction. Young pilots volunteered as kamikaze, crashing their planes into American ships in suicide attacks. The military called it the decisive battle. They even planned to arm civilians with bamboo spears. Then came August 6th. A single bomb erased Hiroshima. 80,000 people vanished in a flash brighter than the sun. The city simply ceased to exist. 3 days later, a second bomb fell on Nagasaki. 40,000 more dead. Between the two explosions, the Soviet Union declared war and swept into Manchuria, destroying Japan's last army and any hope for a negotiated peace. On August 15, 1945, the Japanese people heard something unprecedented, the voice of their living god. Emperor Hirohito, speaking on radio for the first time in history, announced surrender in the most famous understatement of the war. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. He told his subjects they must endure the unendurable and suffer what is insufferable. The night before, young officers had stormed the imperial palace, searching for the recording to destroy it, but they failed, because the broadcast reached every corner of Japan. On September 2nd, aboard the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, Japanese officials in top hats and morning coats signed the surrender documents. Above them flew the same American flag that Commodore Perry had carried when he forced Japan open 91 years earlier. Weeks later, Emperor Hirohito visited General MacArthur at the American embassy. The photograph showed a tall American in casual uniform standing beside a small Japanese man in formal dress. The image told Japan everything about its new reality. The occupation transformed Japan from a military empire into a pacifist democracy. The nation that had believed its emperor was divine now had a constitution, written largely by Americans in 6 days, that renounced war forever. The empire that conquered Asia fell to 2 bombs and a voice on the radio, the Russian Empire. For nearly 2 centuries, the Romanovs ruled the largest contiguous empire on Earth. At its peak, Russia stretched from Poland to the Pacific, from the Arctic to Afghanistan. 23 million square kilometers, 1/6 of the world's land. Peter the Great had dragged a medieval kingdom into the modern age, building a new capital on frozen marshland. Catherine the Great expanded the borders further still, absorbing Crimea and carving up Poland. By 1900, the empire held 125 million souls, but beneath the golden domes and imperial eagles, Russia was rotting. While Britain and Germany industrialized, Russian peasants still worked the land as their great-grandparents had. The empire had abolished serfdom only in 1861, and the former serfs remained desperately poor. In the cities, workers toiled 14-hour days without safety or sanitation. Revolutionary pamphlets circulated in secret. In 1881, terrorists killed Tsar Alexander II with a bomb. Into this volatile inheritance stepped Nicholas II in 1894. He was gentle, devoted to his family, utterly unsuited for the throne. "What is going to happen to me and all of Russia?" he asked, upon learning he would be Tsar. He genuinely did not want the job. In 1905, peaceful protesters marched to the Winter Palace, but soldiers opened fire. Bloody Sunday killed hundreds and shattered the myth of the benevolent Father Tsar. Then came the war that would destroy everything. Russia entered World War I with patriotic fervor, and it ended in catastrophe. At Tannenberg, the Germans annihilated an entire Russian army, 30,000 dead, 90,000 captured. By 1916, Russia had suffered 5 million casualties, Soldiers fought without rifles, waiting to pick up weapons from fallen comrades. Nicholas made matters worse by taking personal command, making himself responsible for every defeat. Meanwhile, the Tsar's wife Alexandra fell under the influence of Grigory Rasputin, a Siberian mystic who claimed he could heal her hemophiliac son. When nobles murdered Rasputin in December 1916, they discovered he was extraordinarily hard to kill, poisoned, shot, beaten, and finally drowned in the frozen Neva. By February 1917, Petrograd was starving. Women in bread lines began to protest. Workers joined them. Then soldiers. Regiment after regiment mutinied rather than fire on the crowds. Within days, 3 centuries of Romanov rule collapsed. Nicholas, trapped on a train, abdicated when his own generals told him it was over. Vladimir Lenin's Bolsheviks promised peace, land, and bread. In October, they seized power, and civil war erupted. On July 17, 1918, in a basement in Ekaterinburg, Bolshevik executioners shot Nicholas, Alexandra, and all 5 of their children. They burned the bodies and threw the remains down a mineshaft. The empire that had terrified Napoleon ended in a cellar, erased so completely that even the bones would not be found for 70 years. The dynasty that believed it ruled by divine right discovered that divinity offers no protection against bread riots and bullets.